So what we're talking about this month is love in action. And as we talk about that, my thought for today was really the title of my talk, which is where do we start? Because what we all want to do is we want to live lives of compassion and kindness and peace and love and equanimity. But there's a place where we start. You know, we're so often, as we move into Valentine's Day, we are so often focused on the other. How do we show up with the other? And I want to take a little step back and talk about what I perceive as the first step we take. Thomas Merton wrote that love is our true destiny. We do not find the meaning of life by ourselves alone, we find it with another. And isn't Valentine's Day a great day to celebrate that, whether it's a romantic partner, family, friends, whatever. I think it was Swami Muktananda that said our relationships are a school of love, aren't they? Isn't just being in relationship with people you love the best way to learn just how to be the lights that we are? They bring meaning and depth to our lives. It's our nature to reach out to each other and form these emotional and loving bonds. We just do. What is the worst thing you can do to somebody? We know this, science knows it. You can isolate them. You put them in solitary confinement. You isolate them from others. You remove the possibility of contact. That's one of the worst things you can do. Why? Because we are creatures of connection. We are meant to bond, to form ties with each other. Real connection is one of the hardest lessons for us to learn, even though it's a fundamental drive in each of us. We long to be seen. We long to be heard. We long to be known by others because it adds meaning and depth to us. It doesn't come easy. I once came across the definition of spirituality as the art of making connections. Think about that. I love that. It is not easy. Spirituality as the art of making connections. Our ability to relate lovingly to each other is one of the fundamental challenges of our spiritual journey. I have found that to be true for me. So how do we get there? And what gets in our way? In researching this talk, I came across many articles. You know me, I'm a big Google. Let's figure out how this works. I came across many articles that gave me great advice on relationships, on romantic relationships. We listen, we communicate, we make time for each other, we hold hands, we work as a team, we are flexible. All that is good stuff. And having been in a relationship for 30 plus years, I can tell you, I should have done more of it. But that's not what I'm talking about today. As I thought about it, the idea crystallized that before we focus on how we become better romantic partners, we have to take a step back that enables us to be better partners. Where do we start to open to the ability to love at all? And so I focused on our most important relationship. I focused on our only lifelong relationship, the one that is truly till death do us part. It's the relationship with ourselves. Okay, is this a goofy thing to talk about on Valentine's Day or what? But no, it's really not, because it's the first step that enables us to be the loving and strong and joyful partners that we want to be. It's 101 to how we take the light that is in us and shine it out to the rest of the world. We have to first direct that light and that love toward ourselves. And that's what I want to talk about a bit today. Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh writes that love is the capacity to take care, to protect, to nourish. If you are not capable of generating that kind of energy toward yourself, it is very difficult to take care of another person. In the Buddhist teaching, it is clear that to love oneself is the foundation of the love of other people. Love is a practice. Love is truly a practice. And that practice begins with ourselves. So we here are familiar with the loving kindness meditation, right? We do it. I'm sure folks have done it individually. It's the tradition that is found in the Buddhist tradition. It's designed to open us up to compassion and kindness and love toward all sentient beings. It's the concept that the Buddhists call Maitri. But where does the practice begin? When we start doing the loving kindness meditation, do we instantly start saying, may the world be filled with loving kindness? No. Where does it start? Where does it start? Yes, it starts right here. Why? Because the energy of love and compassion must first be directed here. We cannot give out what we do not have. We cannot channel out what is not in us to begin with. Our feelings of compassion and love toward all of life, toward all beings, is a natural outpouring of the love and compassion we first feel toward ourselves. That's just how it works. Our ability to have a loving and compassionate relationship with others is an outgrowth of how we feel toward ourselves. I can look at my own relationship. My wife and I have been together for 30 years. And I can see how as I became more spiritually grounded, more aware, more peaceful, the relationship changed because I didn't have to get it there. Right? I wasn't looking for someone else to make me happy, to make me whole. I could be a stronger and a more joyous partner just by working on myself. So often, that is where the work is needed, on our connection with ourselves. However, it's much easier and it's way more fun to just jump into loving others. And we just zoom right by the groundwork. Am I the only person who's ever done that? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but it's way more fun. It's dramatic, it's exciting, it's titillating, it's a ton more engaging than doing the hard work on ourselves. We may be born feeling a natural kindness and a love toward ourselves, but what happens by the time we reach the age of 5 or 6? Or certainly by the time we reach the age of 15 or 16. We have found so many reasons not to like ourselves. We have found so many reasons to judge ourselves and love ourselves less, if at all. We are told in so many ways that we don't measure up. And we are so conveniently smart that if we don't have somebody there telling us we don't measure up, we just tell ourselves. We internalize these standards. We carry them with us, and we continue to find ourselves deficient and unworthy and unlovable. Just by the requirements we set up, we decide there is something wrong with us. If I feel this, there must be something wrong with me. If I think this, there must be something wrong with me. We all do this. So what is our fix? What is our fix when this happens? We look for others to complete us. We look for others to make us happy. We look for success in work. We look for success in life. We keep looking for something to fill the hole that we perceive is there. If only we could see that there is no hole. We make it up and then we fear it. As Swami Vivekananda wrote, all the powers in the universe are already ours. It is we who have put our hands before our eyes and cry that it is dark. Think about that. We create our own darkness where we have absolutely no reason to do so. We see a darkness because we have not found the wholeness that is at our center. I told you before that Reverend Sidney and I are co-teaching a class on world religions down at Roswell Senior and Rich Living. And in the class on Judaism, one of the concepts that we talked about was the notion of the breath of God that dwells at our very center, that stirs at our very center. They call it ruach. And it's in the Hebrew Bible as the breath of God. And we all have that. And in times of stress, in times of trouble, in times when our minds are just zooming all over the place, what is the practice? The practice is to breathe and connect with that breath of the divine that is always there, that is just there. We quiet our minds and we listen for it, and it helps us become centered. That breath, whatever you call it, is there in all of us. We just need to create the practices that help us know it, that help us reach out and touch it. Sometimes our spiritual practices, unfortunately, can exacerbate our feelings of unworthiness. Why? Well, because you come here or places like here and you hear that we go out and we shine our light. We are visions of compassion. We are kind. We are just. We are forgiving. And then you walk out and you go, who the heck was she talking about? You know, I'm just going to go in there and pretend I'm all those things. That's why they call it practice. Are we like that all the time? No. Thank God my daughter's not here, or else she would stand up and start offering testimony about how far I am from reaching that goal. We all are. That's why they call it practice. That's why we come together in communities and we say, whoa, take a breath. One time I was having a moment with my daughter, let's put it this way. And I was in the kitchen and I was just going off, God knows what I was saying. And she looked at me and she said, Mom, find your chi. My chi was so far gone at that point. But that's what we do. That's why we come together in communities to try to find it. And somehow with a big noose or a bungee cord or something, hang on to it. That's what we're doing. So how do we take these first steps? How do we take the first critical step toward the practice that helps us first to love each other and then extend that love out? Well, let's start with first principles. Let's start with the truth. We remind ourselves of who we are. We go back to the truth of what we are, and we start there. We cultivate love for ourselves, not because we behave in particularly deserving ways, because a lot of times we don't. We love ourselves because of who we are. We are expressions of universal love. That's what we teach here. That's what so many of the world's enduring faith traditions teach, in whatever language they put it, in whatever imagery they use for it. We are expressions of universal love. How could we be anything less than whole and complete and worthy of love? Ask yourself that. How could that possibly be? I know that there are those who say that this emphasis on loving ourselves is narcissistic, that all we're doing is kind of gazing at ourselves in the mirror and looking up our own whatevers and saying, oh, you're so wonderful. But that's not, okay, this is video, okay. But that's not what we are doing. It's the opposite. Loving yourself is not based on ego. You don't feel compassion and kindness to yourself because you are you. You feel it because you are a part of everything. You are a part of Spirit's expression, wonderfully and fearfully made, as the psalmist said. It's our ego that identifies us as separate. It's our heart that knows that we are not. That's where we start loving ourselves, because we are part of the great river whose flow carries us all. And we love it all. Who are we just to love all of it except us? Did Spirit single you out as the only bit of creation not worthy of love? How egotistical is that? No. We are stuck with it. We have to love ourselves. I'm here to give you this bad news. That's what I get paid for. But we can do it. We are part of it all. We are worthy and we are beloved. Even though our physical experience, our senses may tell us differently, we know that the fundamental truth of our existence is that we are profoundly and deeply connected with the goodness that created all of us. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, our ancient experience confirms at every point that everything is linked together. Everything is inseparable. Think about that. And science is teaching us that more and more every day. One of our congregants said, one day I know that science is going to prove there is a divine being. And we're heading in that direction. But we know that science tells us that we are connected, that our energy fields overlap, that if you look at all of us from a subatomic level, we are all just mingling and merging and being and pulsing in this room all together. And that if we think we are separate, it is an illusion created by the limitation of our senses. So we live in that truth. Now, it's difficult to keep that front and center in a world that on the face of it gives so little reinforcement. That is especially true, I think, in our world, because our world is one of so many diversions. I read an article that said, how many times a day do we look at our phones? It's a lot. This number was 2,600. That has to be complete garbage, but it's a lot, okay? We focus on so many things that divert us from connections with ourselves, from true connections with each other. I think it was theologian Paul Tillich who said, the greatest love is to truly listen. How many times a day do we sit and just listen to somebody else? That's really hard work. That's some heavy lifting. But that's the end result of where these practices get us. That's the kind of love we want to be able to exhibit to those we love and to others. Our challenge is to keep our hearts open and our egos under control. You know, a lot of times you think your ego is something that puffs you up. When I think of the word ego, I think of a little voice telling me how great I am. But our ego also drags us down. Our ego also tells us that we're separate. It's our ego that tells us that we're not enough. Our challenge, our practices are to keep our hearts warm and open and our egos under control. It is our heart energy that opens us to the truth of our oneness with all of life. It is our heart energy that continues to whisper to us in a little voice that we are beloved all the time, just as we are. Author John Wellwood has drawn upon this Buddhist concept of Maitri that I talked about, loving kindness, to help us move from self-criticism to welcoming and loving ourselves, which is the first step in loving and connecting to others. He writes of the need for what he calls unconditional friendliness toward ourselves. Think about that. Okay, I don't know about you, but when I said those two words, I think I went up like 3 inches. Doesn't that just lighten you up? Unconditional friendliness toward ourselves, whoever we are, however we are showing up. Loving ourselves and growing in our ability to love others comes when we can, as he writes, welcome our experience and hold it with understanding and compassion, whether or not we like it at any given moment. Do you see what he's doing with the whether or not we like it? He's taking the judgment and saying, there's no place for that. We hold it and we just welcome it. It's a quality of welcoming and allowing whatever is going on. Normally, those feelings or thoughts that otherwise would generate judgment or fear or flight, right? How many times do you feel something that you judge as unworthy or as unwelcome? And if you're like me, you just take flight. You just say, I'm just not going to deal with this. I'm going to think something else. This is a very different practice. It's just sitting with it and being with it without fear or flight or judgment or self-criticism. Okay, so let's look at the unconditional. Why does this friendliness have to be unconditional? Because the love that created you, the love that is at your center, is unconditional. Think about that. Your essential wholeness needs no conditions to exist, does it? It is just there. It is the truth of who you are. Do we layer on top of it all sorts of garbage that tells us how unworthy we are? Yes, but it's always there. It is there whether you are smart. It doesn't matter how good looking or rich you are, what school you went to, whether you've ever been on the wrong side of the law, whether you live in a mansion or whether you live on the street. It doesn't matter. The essential wholeness at your nature is unconditional. The power that created and sustains us requires no conditions to appear every day. It is always there. When we extend that same unconditional acceptance toward ourselves, we just complete the circle. We just are acting as who we are, and we take the first step toward healing and toward awakening. Unconditional friendliness. It is not easy because we are so quick to judge. So what does this require of us? First and foremost, it requires us to be willing. So much of spiritual practice, we think we need to move from A to Z. We need to go from being Melanie to being a bodhisattva. That's not how it works. The first step is always to be willing. And even if we don't think we can make that jump, we have to be willing to make that jump. We hold a willingness to be open. We hold a willingness to let Spirit permeate us, to let that wholeness take us over. We become willing to feel it. We become willing to accept it, even if it's difficult. And when we start, it is difficult. And it's also tough as we go on. This is not like a 30-day program. We simply start there. We are willing to let ourselves be. Just be. We cultivate the ability to simply sit without judgment and without agenda. For our zooming Western minds, our crazy monkey minds, full of plans and requirements and fixes and to-do, that is heavy lifting. That is why we practice. More bad news. I have found no substitute for this. I'm pretty old, and by God, I have looked. And I have found no substitute for this, for me, sitting and being. Now, Wellwood found this in his meditation practice. And for me, that's also the first step. Other people have different practices. I recommend that one to start. He writes, meditation cultivates unconditional friendliness through teaching you how to just be, without doing anything, without holding on to anything, and without trying to think good thoughts, get rid of bad thoughts, or achieve a pure state of mind. He writes, allowing yourself the space to be as you are. Think about that. What a gift to give yourselves. Allowing yourself the space to be as you are, letting whatever arises, arise, without fixation on it, and coming back to simple presence. This is perhaps the most loving and compassionate way you can treat yourself. It helps you make friends with the whole range of your experience. That's our goal, is to first make friends with the range of our experience. Why? Because we can take that acceptance. I see some folks leaving. No, I'm just kidding. Because we can take that acceptance, we can take that curious, loving acceptance and extend it to others without requiring them to be any particular way. We have to be welcoming of ourselves, which is so tough, before we can expand our circle to include others. Think of a pool of water as you think about stilling your mind. When water is turbulent, and this is not the first time you've heard this image, I know. When water is turbulent, what happens? Mud comes up, right? You can't see through it. It's disturbed. How do you get the water clear? You let it sit. And the mud settles to the bottom, and the water becomes clear. The same is true with our minds. If we are always reaching in, I can fix this, I can do this, here's a book, here's a this, here's a that, it continues to get, I'll do that again if you like, it continues to get stirred up. Our minds will not still unless we just let them sit. As your mind settles, you begin to experience the basic wholeness that is your ruach, that is the breath of spirit at your very center. Wellwood writes, as you simplify in this way, you start to feel your very presence as wholesome in and of itself. Don't we all want to do that? Don't we all want to have that peace? You feel your very presence as wholesome in and of itself. You don't have to prove that you are good. You discover a self-existing sanity that lies deeper than all thought or feeling. You appreciate the beauty of just being awake, responsive, and open to life. Appreciating this basic underlying sense of goodness is the birth of Maitri, unconditional friendliness toward yourself. What a gift to first give yourself and then give to others. In the loving kindness practice, we begin by cultivating this compassion and kindness toward ourselves. And what do we do then? We extend it to those we love. We extend it to those we know. We extend it to those we know and perhaps don't even like. And then we extend it to all sentient beings. We extend it to all of life. How can we do this? Because our foundation is firm. We can extend it because we first have directed these feelings, this energy, toward ourselves, because our energy out is flowing from an open channel. Us. An open channel of compassion and peace and kindness toward all of life. So think about that. How does that energy change what you bring to a relationship? A romantic relationship, a familiar relationship? How does it strengthen and just open what you bring to those you love? You don't look to others to make you whole. You don't look to others to make you happy, because that is a losing proposition. Love is a gift. It is not the art of the deal. Right? It comes from a... yeah. You become strong and joyful and loving partners. Fred Rogers, what a saint, once said, "We need to help people to discover the true meaning of love. Love is generally confused with dependence. Those of us who have grown in true love know that we can love only in proportion to our capacity for independence." What did he mean by that? I don't think he meant independence in terms of isolation. I think he meant independence in terms of non-dependence. Not looking at another to complete you because you're already complete. You brought your complete self as a gift to this relationship with this other person. Doesn't that sound like the qualities we want to bring to a relationship, to a loving relationship? Doesn't that sound like what we should be celebrating here on Valentine's Day?
Yes.
Listen to that famous passage, thank you, in the Christian scriptures. In Corinthians 13, we all know, we've all been to weddings and we've heard it. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoings, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. That is the love of Maitri. That is the love that we can extend when we have done the work to make ourselves the partners that first love ourselves, that first extend that heartfelt love to ourselves, that acceptance, that unconditional friendliness toward ourselves. It's a process. Sometimes I think about spiritual development, and I think, why do it? And I think, here's why. Because we are born wonderful. We are born loving, but we are not born trained. We are not born disciplined. We are not born having worked on our own awakening and our own awareness to learn these truths. For most of us, wisdom does not arise by accident. It arrives through discipline and through practice. And that's why I get up here every week and talk about it. Because that's the way to get there. That is the way to become a person who can extend this loving kindness to ourselves, to those whom we love, to the world. Many of you remember Reverend Annette Mize, who was our first associate minister and more recently spoke over at Spiritual Living Center. She taught that spiritual growth is like tending a garden. Great image. The gardener doesn't make the flowers or the vegetables grow. Do you stand over your whatevers and say, grow, damn it, grow? No, you don't. The gardener creates the conditions in which life and growth can take place. That's all we do. We create the conditions in which the miracle of growth happens. In our hearts, we create the conditions in which the miracle of awakening happens. And that's why we practice. I want to close with a quote from Lama Surya Das, which he wrote in Awakening to the Sacred. He wrote, "Learning how to love is the goal and the purpose of spiritual life. Not learning how to develop psychic powers, not learning how to bow, chant, do yoga, or even meditate, but learning to love. Love is the truth. Love is the light." With intentional practice, we can find that light. We can cultivate it within ourselves, and we share it with those we love and with the world. So happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming. Please, have some more food.